Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kelly McFarland, your facilitator for today's webinar. This webinar is organized by Swords to Plowshares and is designed for the grantees of the Texas Veteran Employment Collaborative to stay informed of the best practices for providing employment and training services to Texas veterans. This webinar is the first in a series of technical assistance webinars. It's designed to help maximize your outreach efforts to veterans seeking employment and other wraparound services. Following the presentation, we will engage in a discussion with the collaborative to discuss obstacles and solutions to reach veterans in need of employment services. Jeff Millard, our presenter for this webinar, is a policy associate with Swords to Plowshares, specializing in community education and outreach. Jeff presents Combat to Community Cultural Competency Curriculum to hiring managers, recruiters, HR professionals, as well as other professional cohorts, including educators, attorneys, and police officers. He previously helped set up and run an SSVF program in Washington, D.C., spending almost 2 years directing outreach for that program. Jeff spent 9 years in the military, including 13 months in Iraq, and is now a service-connected disabled veteran. He has a BA in American Studies from SUNY Buffalo and is an expert in veteran policy, concentrating on macro solutions to veteran issues around homelessness and less than honorable discharges. During this webinar, you may type a question to the panelists or Swords to Plowshare staff at any time. Simply type your questions in the questions box on the right side of the webinar's display. At the end of the presentation, we will review the questions and comments posted. All participants will be given a chance to ask a question of Jeff by raising your virtual hand. Simply click on the small hand icon under the list of attendees next to your name. Please note, this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the Swords to Plowshares website. Without further delay, please welcome our presenter, Jeff Millard.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Also, thank you to all of our grantees who were able to make it on the call. I hope that those who aren't on live will get a chance to listen to this recording and go through the presentation with us. We're going to start with outreach. The big reason why we wanted to start our first webinar in this series with outreach is because that's really where services begin. That's our first interaction with our veterans, and it's where all of our services really truly begin. So some of the stuff that we'll be going over today, we're going to go over identifying who you intend to serve. We're going to talk about materials, what you should and shouldn't put on your materials. We're going to talk about targeted outreach. We're going to spend some time talking about knowing your continuum of care, as well as tracking and follow-up. Quick overview for those of you who might not be that familiar with Swords to Plowshares. Swords to Plowshares is a comprehensive veteran service organization based in San Francisco, and now with offices both in San Francisco as well as the East Bay. We have a number of housing programs, including permanent supportive housing, as well as transitional housing and SSVF. We also have where I work, the Institute for Veteran Policy. We're working on macro solutions to veteran homelessness, as well as a benefits advocacy department. Our legal department, actually, we have lawyers on staff as well as pro bono attorneys who help veterans through the process of their benefits, any discharge upgrades that they might need. That sort of thing is available through our legal department. We also have employment and training here, of course, as well as a number of services that have to do with health and social services. Real quickly, customer service is really what outreach is all about. It's really what everything that we do is all about. And helping veterans is about providing an experience that improves their lives. It's not a check the box or assembly line type of service. We have to really get to know our veterans, and veterans usually know many other veterans. So a positive experience from your clients is really the best outreach you can have, because word of mouth works. Many veterans who come into Swords heard about Swords because someone else had a very successful experience with us. And so the more that you can customize your customer service for the clients that are coming in, the better off you're going to be. The other part that I want to mention about customer service is we really have a dual role customer service when we're talking about employment. not only are the veterans that we come in contact with our customers, but so too are the employers. And we'll talk about that in further webinars about that, but I want you to keep in mind that it's not just the veterans that you need a customer service attitude with. Real quickly, for those who might not have that much experience serving veterans, we want to just go through the fact that not everyone who spent time in the military actually self-identifies with the word veteran, right? We know it's a loaded word. We know that women veterans tend not to self-identify with that word as often as men do. We know that veterans of color tend not to. We know that younger veterans all tend not to self-identify as much with that term veteran. And it makes sense, right? I mean, if you close your eyes right now and you think about the word veteran, you probably think about, you know, your grandfather who fought in World War II, your uncle who fought in Vietnam, or at least that's the way it is for me. A couple of other things we want to keep in mind, some of the stereotypes around veterans, which will be very important when you're talking to possible employers about veterans, is that not all veterans are in crisis. In fact, 26% of veterans in the workforce have some type of mental health issue, including post-traumatic stress. The overall number for employees in the United States for mental health issues is 26%. We are right along with the every other employee in the country as far as that is concerned. And not all veterans have served in combat. Not all veterans have access to VA health care. So these are just some things to keep in mind. The basics are we're not all the same. Veterans are not a monolith. We don't all think the same. We don't all act the same. And we certainly don't all have the same experience. That said, there are a lot of kinds of veterans out there. And so you're going to have to identify who you really intend to serve if you're going to do it well. Are you going to be serving present-era veterans? Are you serving women veterans? Are you serving Vietnam veterans? There's a lot of different types of veterans out there, and the outreach has to be tailored to exactly the type of person that you want to serve through this grant and target that population. And you have to think about, do the jobs that we're looking for make sense for that population, right? If we're trying to get veterans who are close to retirement age work, we might not be looking in, you know, introduction manual labor type fields, right? It just makes sense. A little bit about materials. First thing, when I ran outreach programs in DC, one of the things that I always kept with me was a cart. In fact, to this day, when I do presentations, I have a cart that sits right by my desk. Everyone here at Swords has seen it. That all I have to do is replace it with all my materials, and I'm good to go. So I'd recommend having that so that whenever you're out on the road, you have all of your materials in one place. I know it's been really helpful for me. The materials themselves, we have to think about what's actually on our materials and what is going to attract a veteran. And the common everybody, or you see a lot of, especially at the VA and other places, their outreach has, you know, we'll see the Uncle Sam picture and we'll see lots of American flags. And we tend to think that because veterans have served the country, that that is going to attract them. But data is showing that veterans tend to be attracted to things the same way as the rest of the population. Clear pictures where they can see themselves in it. So if you notice Swords materials, you won't see the kind of, you know, 1995 Microsoft Office clip art pictures in it. We actually use photographs of our clients sometimes. Sometimes they're not our clients, but they're other veterans. We try and see our photographs that we use where the veterans will see themselves in those photographs. Another thing to go along with your materials that you're going to want to have is a pre-prepared 5-minute, 20-minute, and even 1-hour presentation on what your program is, who it serves, and how you reach them. All right? We're going to go now into some do's and don'ts with that. So a couple of just really clear rules on do's for your materials. Always want your materials to be really clear on who you are, what you do, how someone can reach you, who's eligible, all the who, what, when, where, those facts need to be really clear and on your materials, because you don't want someone to pick up one of your brochures somewhere and say, ooh, I wonder if I'm eligible for this program. You need to really be able to spell that out usually. You want to use those good graphics and pictures, right? Again, we talk about we want our veterans who see our materials to see themselves in those materials. On the link here that you see on the screen is a good place where you can pull some of those from. But I'll tell you, we sometimes use Google, use some of those open source photos that are out there that we can use. Sometimes we work with photographers who will come in and actually photograph our events and various other things that we do so that we have these photographs that we can use throughout our materials. A couple of things you really kind of want to avoid. Let's talk about that for a second. You don't want to be overly complex. You don't have to fill every single little space with a picture or a word or a color or something. It's okay to have blank space. You want it to be easy to read, so making things overly complex can actually be quite difficult. Here we talked for a second about that typically patriotic imagery, right? The flags, the Uncle Sam, that our brains kind of tell us, oh yeah, veterans are going to react to that because they serve the country. But keep in mind, we all haven't had the same experiences, and we tend to see data showing us that veterans respond to the same types of things that everyone responds to. We want to see ourselves in the material, okay? Another big one for those of us who are serving women veterans is the term female. For those of us, especially those of us like myself who are in the infantry, female almost seems like a cuss word, right? That time in the military, it's like, that's the female latrine in the female area. Well, that has translated, and we know that women veterans tend to respond less to that word as well, right? There's stigma attached to it. So we try and avoid that stigma, use a term that the civilian community uses, right? Very few things for women overall that are women's services use the term female when you're talking outside of the veteran community. Let's talk a little bit about what your office is going to look like, right? If you're asking veterans to come into your office, it has to be a safe space for those veterans, right? You don't want to have things all over the place that are going to be triggering, but also it has to be a safe space for them to come in if they're a veteran who's a single parent and going to bring in their child or children, right? What's in there for those children? What types of things do you have there? Is there a safe space where the children can play? Are there things that are going to be up on the walls that are going to be upsetting to those children? Is there things that are going to trigger post-traumatic stress, or whether that's from combat or from military sexual trauma? Thinking about those things in the way that your office is laid out, what's on your desk, what's on your walls, what music might be playing, that sort of thing you want to think about. You also want to think about some of the things you're putting up for other cultural sensitive reasons. If we take a look at the picture here, we pulled this online of a veteran. This is his office. He's a Marine veteran, obviously. You can see the Marine Corps flag. You can see some state flags in the background, school flag. But the only branch of service that's represented in those flags we see is the Marine Corps flag, other than on the Vets Club sign. So if you're going to put that up, and I know my Marines out there are really gung-ho, the Semper Fi and the USMC, but if you're going to put up one branch, you probably want to do it for all of the branches. That sort of thing, thinking about who's coming in and are they going to be pushed away by the things you're putting up, or are they going to be welcomed into the space? Is it physically comfortable? Are the chairs physically comfortable if you're dealing with veterans who have disabilities? Is it wheelchair accessible? That sort of thing you really want to think about with your office space and the way that veterans are going to interact with your office space. So we want to go through a poll question now. I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly, who's going to walk us through our first poll question. Kelly, you there? Kelly, you might be talking with your mute button on.
Hi, Jeff. Sorry about that. We did experience a little technical difficulty.
No problem.
Wanted to open the poll question up to all our participants. Hopefully, you should be seeing an option to answer a poll question that we currently are showing on the screen there, talking about where do you currently conduct outreach? In your experience as outreach folks to veterans in your communities, do you find a particular area that's more successful than others, or have you tried certain areas that aren't successful? We'd really love to hear from you on this. And while the poll is in progress, Jeff, do you find that there are particular areas or places that are either more successful than others or produce interesting results?
Actually, yeah, Kelly. In my experience, some of the best outreach comes from going outside the box, right? And I'll talk about this later on when we talk about some of those targeted outreach and how to reach out to those veterans. But I found in my experience that it's getting out there, getting face-to-face with people, and exchanging, getting to know them. It's about building relationships, right? When I was in D.C., we started out kind of just ping-ponging all over, and when we really set out a plan and made our targeted outreach and looked at where are these veterans engaging the system and training those people and getting the references from them, that's where we really paid off. So as we'll talk about later on, things like the local WIC office, everybody knew me there, and it was like, oh, we have a veteran coming into WIC and they're not connected to any other services. They always sent them over to me, and it was really a good way to get to know people and build those relationships. And I would have to go in and spend lots of time actually maintaining those relationships over time.
Well, and that's very interesting. And I think, Jeff, the reason why I say that's interesting is I think the results of the poll should be visible to folks right now, and it does indicate that they do have this similar kind of success when they've been doing outreach at those types of locations. The VA vet centers, obviously, and colleges and universities are participants have had the most success at for outreach. Streets actually up there at 50%, and that's very good, and we're happy to see that that our service providers are actually making concerted effort to do street outreach. And again, I'm really happy to see the online social media number be that high at 83%. And the reason why is because we do know, Jeff, is this right, that that the younger veterans coming back, when I say the younger ones, the newer generation are more likely to interact and engage via the social media tools. Are we finding that to be true?
100% true. And we've got a couple slides on that later on. We'll get kind of into the weeds of that, but definitely true that the younger generation, the present era veterans, of which you and I are both a part, are definitely much more active on social media than we've seen before, which makes sense, right? It's a newer tool, and present era vets are much more on it than we've ever seen, than we're seeing out of any other era veteran.
Oh, that's great, and that's an important thing for service organizations that kind of on the fence or wondering about how much effort they should use or how much effort they should put into engaging on social media. That ought to tell you right there that it's worth your time and effort.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Jeff, and I think that takes care of poll number 1, and everybody look for poll number 2 coming up in a few slides, and also please don't forget to engage Jeff with any questions that you'd like him to answer at the end of the session in the Q&A part. Jeff,
right.
Back to you.
Thank you. So let's talk for a second about targeted outreach, right? In order to, you first have to identify what type of veteran you want to serve. Are we serving women veterans? Are we serving present era veterans? Are we serving women who are present era veterans? Deciding that. And then you have to wrap your outreach strategy around that target population, right? You have to make sure that your target population makes sense, or your outreach strategy makes sense given the target population you want to reach, right? If you decide you want to reach World War II veterans and you're putting most of your resources towards Twitter, I think you probably are putting your resources in an area where you're not going to get a lot of reaction, right? You're not going to get the kinds of things back from that you really want. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, given this grant, a lot of people are going to be targeting present era veterans, right? Operation Rocky Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn, and obviously the new operation that we have going on today as well. Social media is going to be a must. As Kelly talked about, our present era veterans are on social media like no other generation. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. We have a special social media slide later on, and I'll kind of get in the weeds of what to do there and some of the things that I found successful, and hopefully some of the things you've found successful, we'll talk about that as well. Another big spot is colleges, universities. Please include in this community colleges, right? I know I went to a 2-year school before I went on to a 4-year school, and we're seeing a lot of present era veterans coming back and going to the community colleges and the junior colleges first before they move on to university. Now this also includes some of your trade schools, right? The new GI Bill you can use for a lot more than just a 2 or 4 year university, right? You can use them for some of these trade schools. Make sure you're including those in your outreach for younger veterans as well. Making sure that at the medical centers, right, your local medical centers, you know who the OIF, OEF rep is, right? At every single medical center, the VA has mandated there to be at least one point person for present era veterans. That person you should know by name. They should know you by name. They should know your phone number by heart. You should have a very good relationship with that person because you will get a lot of referrals from that person. The other thing that I'd like to mention here is National Guard and Reserve bases, right? We know that Texas is one of the most dense states when it comes to the veteran population. There's also a huge National Guard and Reserve throughout Texas. And so National Guard and Reservists are eligible for a lot of VA programs. They're eligible for SSVF and other healthcare programs. And so they're also struggling. The National Guard, in every statistical category, struggles even more so than veterans coming off of active duty. They struggle more with suicide. They struggle more with mental health issues. And so you might see them even more than you would someone coming directly out of Fort Hood or something of that nature. So you want to make sure that the folks at the National Guard Armory know you. They know what services are available. Maybe setting up presentations there as well can be really helpful for reaching present era veterans. When you're reaching out to women veterans, right? Again, colleges, including community colleges. We know women are attending universities, in fact, at a higher rate than men are attending universities, right? We want to go to women's service agencies. There's particular agencies that have nothing to do with the military. I talked before about my relationship with the WIC office in Washington, D.C., but the same was true for the SNAP office, right? A lot of women are going in for SNAP benefits. They're going into the local housing authority. There's very particular women's-only spaces that you can go making presentations to the staff there, to the veterans who might come to there. That includes the women's clinic at the VA. Same thing as you have the relationship with the OIF, OEF rep there. You want to have that same kind of relationship at the women's clinic. If there's local women's shelters in your area, I know there were several shelters in Washington, D.C. that were dedicated just to women, emergency shelters. We had shelters dedicated to family, and I would go in and train and outreach those staff as well. So you want to make sure that you're hitting those different areas, that you're going to them for outreach, the areas that women are going to, right? Because women tend to underutilize the VA in comparison to men who are veterans, right? The other thing, you really do need to know your continuum of care. If you notice, I've said several times that I've had a lot of success with going into the local WIC, the SNAP office, the housing authority, and all of these different social services that were in my continuum. It's really important that you know your continuum. I've spent hours just with different agencies in continuum of care, even going over their policies, right? Going over their intake process. I worked with the Red Cross of the Washington, D.C. area, and they weren't even asking on their intake whether or not someone had been in the military. So I helped them revamp their intake, things like that. When you do something like that for an agency, I guarantee you they're going to start sending you clients as they come in. And the better that you know your continuum and the better that your continuum knows you, they'll actually be able to provide you with better references, right? So they won't be sending you people that don't qualify for your programs for one reason or another. So that relationship with the continuum of care is really the linchpin to doing outreach, in my opinion. Street outreach. We've talked about street outreach in the poll. We found that we were getting some good results. You guys, it seems like, are out there doing the street outreach, which is awesome. We're right there with you on the effort to end veteran homelessness. What you have to realize when doing street outreach is who you're outreaching to, right? If your target population is new era veterans, we're seeing an increased number of new era veterans on the streets, but still the majority of veterans who are on the street are from other eras. So if you're particularly looking to help new era veterans, street outreach may not be where you want to soak a lot of your resources into. Also, women veterans tend to be on the street less, although when they do get to street homelessness, as we all know, they've used up more of their natural resources, and so they're harder to help at that point. So street outreach is great, but know that that has a very particular targeted population that you're going to reach through street outreach. My favorite, of course, outreaching outside of the box, right? So we know that veterans are getting plugged into the system, but very rarely, actually, less than half of veterans get plugged into the system through the VA, right? They're going to get plugged in through other ways. So whether that's through the Continuum of Care, whether that's at yellow ribbon events, stand-downs, happy hours, networking events. Here in the Bay, we have a Vets in Tech group that does a happy hour once a month, right? That happy hour is a great place to outreach to veterans who are looking for employment in the tech field, right? Lots of other places. You can go to concerts and table at concerts. A lot of musicians really want to support veterans. They don't know how. Simply reaching out to musicians to table at their concerts. Lots of vets going to those shows. Going into the barber shops, the beauty salons, going to sporting events. The picture that you see up right now is some of our staff at a San Francisco Giants game. Sorry for the fans out there that are not Giants fans, but we are here in San Francisco, and we have a really great relationship with the Giants. So we're out there. They put PSAs up on the big screen for us, and we've had veterans come in for services who are simply watching a Giants game on TV, or who are at the game for a reason or another, and they end up coming in for services. So that doing that outreach, building those community connections, going to your local churches. There's a lot of churches out there who have programs, whether it's collecting clothes for people who are going job interviews, who are doing feeding programs, who run emergency shelters. A lot of churches doing some really great work with veterans, making sure that they know who you are and what you're doing. So it's a lot of things that you can do. I'm really excited to see what maybe some of you all out there are doing that are outside the box, because that creative energy that can get going when you're doing outreach can really bring in a lot of veterans through referrals. Even though maybe you're not directly talking to the veteran at that moment, you end up with really great referrals through this. Rural outreach. So this was definitely an issue for me when my SSVF program expanded into Maryland and Virginia. I went from Washington, D.C., all brick buildings and concrete jungle, right, to having to go out into rural Virginia and actually doing rural outreach. Rural outreach comes with, as I'm sure I don't have to tell all of you in Texas, rural outreach comes with very particular issues, right? The distance that you have to actually physically travel to do that kind of outreach. The sparsity of people, and thus the sparsity of veterans, right? It's not as dense of a population, and so you're going to spend more time out there getting that one or two veterans who are out there who really need help, and those out there who are doing it are really doing great work. Some of the things that keep in mind, thinking outside of the box with your rural area, right? Those sporting events. Those sporting events don't have to be the San Francisco Giants or the Dallas Cowboys, sorry. It doesn't have to be that big, right? It could be that Friday night high school football event. It could be the Little League baseball event. It can be some of those areas, especially in rural communities, where communities can kind of come together around other things, whether that's a state fair or these other things that the community is going to come around and support. Those are the types of things where you should be there as a veteran provider, because veterans are going to go to the same thing as everyone else goes to in the community as well. Again, churches, another great thing in the rural spaces, a lot of community building around churches, lots of community events out there. So keep those in mind. Look at your community billboards out there and see what events are happening. There's also outreach that you can be doing inside the VA, right? We've got the VA Medical Center, we've got vet centers, we've got CBOCs, certain cities, I think Houston might be one of these, who have community resource and referral centers. I had a great relationship back in DC with our community resource and referral center, to the point where 50% at one point of our intake was coming in through the community resource and referral center. We had office hours there. So knowing your VA staff, knowing what they're doing, and them knowing what you're doing really provides you. I found that we were getting really good referrals through VA staff, because if we could get the VA staff to understand what our programs are, they would know the exact veterans that were best for the programs, and so we got really good referrals from them as well. There's also veteran service officers and veteran service organizations and your county veteran service officers, right? And we know that present-era veterans aren't joining traditional VSOs at the same rate as our previous generation of veterans did, right? But they're still joining veteran service organizations. They're still going to see veteran service officers. And the veterans who need the most help are going to the VSOs. And so having a good relationship with the VSOs means that you're going to have a relationship with veterans who are seeking services, who want help, and who are reaching out for it, even if they're not reaching out maybe to other means. They're reaching out to try and get their benefits, right? And so having that relationship with the VSOs can be really critically important to getting those new era veterans in. We talked about the importance in reaching out to new era veterans of going to the colleges and universities. And of course we know you're going to have to outreach to the veteran service organizations or the veteran organizations that are on campus. But again, thinking outside the box, who's on campus? There's the GI Bill accrediting agent, right? There's the EOP office, disability office, and groups, right? You have campus groups, student groups that are on campus, and veterans who are dealing with issues of disabilities might seek out those disability groups, the LBGT offices and the LBGT groups. There's lots of little groups and offices on campus where we wouldn't think of necessarily at first, oh, that's where the veterans are going. But keep in mind, veterans, we're all different. We come from lots of different walks of life, so we're going to be interested in some of these different clubs when we do get to campus, and don't throw out, you know, oh, that's not where veterans go. Maybe some veterans do, and the more robust your outreach gets, the more on campus you can be, and the more you'll see these different groups and veterans interacting with these different groups. So now we're going to move on to our second poll question before we get into some of the digital outreach slides. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly and see if Kelly can pop in to do these poll questions. Let's see if maybe we can do this one without some of the tech issues we had last time. Kelly, are you there for me?
Right here for you, Jeff. Done. No
All
technical
right.
issues this time. Yay. Speaking of technical stuff, I think the question came up a little earlier, or the comments came up a little earlier, that we keep harping on this, that the current era veterans are big users of social media. It's a very powerful tool to outreach, and we are curious to see which tools our participants on today's webinar use, whether successfully or unsuccessfully. Please feel free to select which one of or many of the tools that you use to outreach to either veterans or other veteran service organizations or direct service organizations that help in your delivery of services. Jeff, well, do you find that there's a particular platform or type of tool that is more successful than another from the list that we have on our poll? Which are the big ones?
Yeah, I don't know that there's one that's necessarily more successful than others. I know that I have preferences. My preferences are between LinkedIn and Twitter. What I really like about LinkedIn is there's a lot of veteran groups, okay, especially here in the Bay. You know, there's a big tech community here in the Bay. So there's a lot of veteran affinity groups within LinkedIn, and you can send emails to those veteran affinity groups. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. There's lots of stuff that you can do with those veteran groups through LinkedIn and through some of those professional connections. The other one that I really get big on is Twitter. I love Twitter. I love it in my personal life. I love Twitter in my professional life, in outreach. You know, we talked about those concerts, right? Well, how do you contact some of those bands? Well, a lot of the bands that I ended up tabling at their concerts, I just tweeted at them. You know, I would tweet at a band and say, hey, you want to help veterans? How about letting my agency table at your concert, right? You're having trouble getting a hold of that sports organization. You know, you want to get that good relationship with the Dallas Cowboys. Tweet at them.
Right.
These companies, these sports teams, these bands are monitoring their Twitter. You know, I had trouble flying the other week, and I tweeted my difficulties at the airline. They answered me before I got to the front of the line at the help desk at the airport. You know, Twitter is a really interactive medium, and I really like that about it. And you can, we'll talk about this more when we get to the social media stuff, but that's my, you know, that's what gets my, that gets me jazzed, right? So I really like Twitter, although I can see definitely the pluses to Facebook. I can see the pluses to Google+. That was a lot of pluses. But those are really they all have their benefits to it. My personal preference is really, I think, fits with Twitter.
And I think that also fits with what we're seeing from the next generation and also the VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations, are having some success on the Twitters. The other tool that I do want to mention is the Google+. And the reason why I bring this up is because it may be interesting to set up a kind of a mirror what you would on Facebook on the Google Plus for a veteran service organization. The reason being it's tied to the Google's algorithm for search engines. So in other words, I know it's a lot of tech speak, but what it means is the more interaction you have on this Google Plus tool, typically it equates in a bunch of mathematical ways to the better search result your organization will see when people search for your name in the search results for a geographical area.
Right, it moves you up in those
worth
Google
looking
rankings.
into. Right, yeah, puts you up on the higher up on the Google list without having to do a whole lot. So something to look into for the organizations that are looking to boost their search engine, what we call SEO, without having to spend any money.
Right.
In any event, but Twitter and the Facebook and the LinkedIn is a very powerful tool for professional stuff. That's what we're finding. So yay. Those pretty much mirror the poll results that we're seeing. And I think that takes care of poll number 2. Jeff, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. So let's get into and talk about some of that digital outreach, right? Let me stress again, let's go back to the beginning when we talked about finding your target population. Once you figure out your target population, once you have your outreach strategy then, now in your digital outreach, it should be just as strategic as picking your target population and should be in fitting with your overall strategic outreach plan, right? Your digital outreach has to be in line with that, right? Again, if you're looking to serve World War II veterans and you're putting most of your outreach efforts into Twitter, I don't know you're going to get the results you really want in order to meet your numbers, right? So let's talk about some of those social media aspects, right? We have all of this is social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Each of these spaces has veteran-owned groups, right? So Facebook has veteran groups. I belong to several on Facebook, right? There's veteran groups on LinkedIn, even on places like YouTube, Twitter, of course, Instagram, Pinterest. There's so many different social medias out there, all of which have veteran groups on them, right? So make sure that you're using those groups. Also, hashtags. A lot of the hashtags started on Twitter, but a lot of the other social media are really caught up to hashtags. So we're coming up on Veterans Day. Getting in on those conversations on those Veterans Day hashtags, right? It's gonna put you into other people's mentions. Same thing like I talked about before, tweeting at those bands, those sports teams. It gets you in their mentions, and a conversation with them could open you up to thousands and thousands of new people who never would have heard of you just because you have an online conversation with the Dallas Cowboys or with if any of you can, Beyonce or some other incredibly large musical act out there, right? Those are the types of things that thousands of people can see just because you're tweeting at them. Maybe they retweet you. Maybe you get up in their mentions, and all of a sudden you're being exposed to lots of other groups and people that never would have heard the message that you had otherwise, right? And so the other big thing with social media you want to keep in mind is that social media is best to be sent out Thursday through Saturday. Those are the peak times across the country for social media. Now, there's lots of other times that you should be on social media and using it, but if you're going to put something out there for social media, those are the peak times for usage, right? I also want to point out that all of these social media, veterans organizations have it. And, if you look at Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, they've got thousands of followers. And so if you get into a discussion with them, those are people following them who care about veteran issues, who may be veterans themselves. And so by getting into a Twitter conversation with a veteran service organization like that, you're getting into a conversation where thousands of people are watching your conversation and seeing that the way that you're putting your materials out there, and that can be great outreach. I know that some organizations use email. Email isn't designed necessarily for outreach, right? It's great to keep your supporters abreast of what's happening in your program, but in and of itself, it's not really an outreach tool per se, right? An email, of course, sent Monday mornings where people go into work first thing, they're going to log in and look at their email. But there are ways you can use email for outreach. It's in and of itself not necessarily an outreach tool, but if you, for example, buy a list from someone, you can, from an organization, whether it's a veterans organization, whether you send an email through LinkedIn to a certain group of veterans through there. Email can be used as an outreach tool, especially when combined with some of these other tools. So keep that in mind, that email primarily is going to be used for keeping your supporters up to date. When you're actually talking about outreach, you're probably going to have to mix it with another tool for it to really be a robust outreach tool. Intake. A lot of groups that I've worked with don't view intake as part of outreach. You know, it's once they get into the building, that's a different department, right? I would argue that it's really very much part of your outreach, because if word of mouth gets around that your intake is a pain in the butt, it's going to be really hard for you to then go out and continue to do outreach, right? I know it's one of my biggest frustrations at the VA, right? You spend a month trying to get an appointment just to go do a survey to get an appointment with a doctor, right? That intake where you're asked to tell your story over and over and over again. I have 9 years of military history. I have 13 months of combat history, right? And every time I see a new doctor, I'm telling them all this whole story. It doesn't make me want to go back in there for anything at all, right? So making sure that you have a base set of questions, so that the base set of questions don't have to be continuously asked at every department for every person that your client might see. That kind of streamlined intake will definitely spread word of mouth and actually improve your outreach, because you'll get more people wanting to come in. The other big thing about your standardized intake that can really help with outreach, you want to find out how they found out about you, right? You want to know, hey, did you hear about us because we were at the San Francisco Giants game? Did you hear about us on Twitter? How did you hear about us? And really be able to track that and provide that real-time feedback of how the veterans who are coming in for services are hearing about you. And that could mean that you need to spend more time in other places. It could mean that you need to spend less time because you're getting all of your resources from VA and you need to put more resources into other places. You can take that in a lot of different directions, but that intake really provides you with that information. Wraparound services. The veterans who come in my experience, very rarely come in, and they might be coming to you for job help, right? It's employment. But very rarely is that their only issue that they're facing, right? They might have some legal issues, some health issues. They might have housing instability there. So seeing the veteran walking through the door as a human being and not just as an employee that you're going to try and get work, but as a human being who's coming in with complex problems, and understanding that those complex problems can be helped with some of those wraparound services. And maybe you don't have those wraparound services in-house. But going back to knowing your continuum of care, not only can you provide your veterans with, not only can you get referrals from those continuum of care for veterans, you can actually refer the veterans who are coming into your office to some of those offices. Knowing somebody at WIC means that when I send somebody over there, I know who they're going to, right? So keeping in mind those wraparound services. And really knowing your continuum of care. I bring up this WIC example a lot because it was really meaningful for me that I knew Mary at WIC. I knew that I could call Mary and say, hey, I have a veteran in my office. Mary, when's a good time for this veteran to come in and see you? They need help with their WIC benefits. And she's sitting in my office. When can she come over and see you? And Mary would say, I got a time slot at this time. Have them make sure they come in and ask for me, right? That warm handoff makes all the difference, so that you're not just like, oh, you need help with WIC. Well, why don't you go stand in the WIC office line? Make sure you get there by 6 a.m. because they fill up fast, and if you don't do that, you're out of luck. Well, I didn't really help that veteran out that much, right? And that comes with knowing your continuum, making sure that they see your face out there. They have your business card taped to the monitor of their computer so that they can refer people over at a moment's notice. That's the kind of relationship you want with the continuum of care. We have tracking and reporting that's definitely built into this grant, and we can certainly help with any questions that you might have with the tracking and reporting. What also make sure you're looking at that tracking. We're not asking you to track and report just so that we can have numbers randomly. That should inform your outreach. If you're seeing that all of your intake is coming in from one area, are you ignoring the other areas and not doing outreach and you're only doing it there? Is that where the veterans are? This kind of tracking is what really is going to give you the data, the scientific data, to show you where you could be putting your energy into and getting a better effect out of that time, energy, and money that you're going to be putting in. And the longer that you can track after people discharge from your program, the more accurately you can see, did we get this person the help that they needed? Did we get them the job, but then they couldn't keep up because they had housing instability? Well, we need to work on our wraparound services. Or did we do a really great job of not only getting someone employment, but making sure that they were signed up for SNAP as well until those paychecks start rolling in, making sure that we started a benefits claim for them, making sure that their housing was stable, and if not, hey, can we help that out? Did we get them into the local SSVF program? Those sorts of things can really make a huge difference in the overall success of your programs. So right now I'd like to open it up and see what questions we have. Kelly can help us to moderate some of those questions coming in. We know you can type them, you can raise your virtual hand, so the more questions that we can have coming in, we really like to open it up and see what your experiences are, what your questions are, things like that. Kelly, you there?
I am, Jeff. Thank you so much for that very informative presentation. And I think you were informative to the point that you've answered everybody's questions before they had them. We don't have any queued up right now. I would like to give everybody a last opportunity to raise your hands virtually, of course.
Also, if someone out there has some really great experiences, I know that I am not the end-all be-all of outreach. I've had a lot of success in outreach, but I am sure that there are some folks out there that have some awesome outreach stories. If you have something that you want to share, you can type that up and I'll share it, or Kelly will share it, or you can raise your virtual hand if you have a microphone, and we'll get you on to actually share what successes you've had. So it doesn't necessarily have to be questions. I don't want to cut people off. I'm not the end-all, be-all. I have had successes, but you all out there in Texas have had some wonderful successes as well.
And Jeff, that's a very good point. And if we don't hear about them today on today's webinar, we certainly encourage folks to share them with you and us as the organization. You can contact Jeff Millard with any other questions or comments or successes or challenges that you've experienced. His email address is gmillard@stp-sf.org, and actually should be on the screen right now. And remember, please don't hesitate to email any questions or comments or discussion you have for him. Well, Jeff, we don't have any questions queued up right now. We did have a very, very good discussion on some important outreach tools during the polls, and we appreciate everybody's participation in that. With no questions further, I think we can wrap the webinar up, and we appreciate everybody's participation. And remember, this webinar will be archived on our website and on our YouTube channel. You can find us at youtube.com/Vets Helping Vets. Usually we get these posted within 48 hours or so. That concludes today's presentation. We'd like to thank our presenter, Jeff Millard, and you, our participants. And please note that once you exit the webinar, each of you will be prompted to complete a brief survey to evaluate this presentation. Your feedback is really important to us and is greatly appreciated. We script and present these webinars for you, so it's important for us to get your feedback and hear what you're thinking about them. Thank you all again for your time. You may now disconnect.